my group. It says it's being live streamed. So I will say, hi, besties and bosses. Happy Tuesday. I am just checking to see if we are actually streaming in the group, because sometimes it tells me we're live and we're not yet. And I don't see it in here. Let's see here. We'll be live in besties and bosses. Can you hear me? Okay, it's saying we're live. We are live. How are you all? I am so excited to hang with you today. We have a special guest with us. I'm going to let her introduce you while I check out the tech, but I have a special dear friend who's also a mastermind sister of mine joining us. We're going to be talking all things content and just getting back to some basics on content. But Jessica, do you want to introduce yourself? And I'll just kind of check some of the tech for a second to make sure we're actually connected properly.
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here. My name is Jessica Johnson. I own a content marketing agency, Buzzworthy Content, where I work with all different kinds of world-changing brands, helping them with their content and their marketing. I mentor writers and editors every day, and also have a course where I get to teach people how to build their own copywriting businesses. So super thrilled to be here and just talk content, all the fun things, and hopefully give you guys lots of amazing ideas for your own content, just with this perspective of seeing what a lot of really big brands do and what's making a difference for them.
Yay. And I will just say, because I know Jess really well, her business is thriving, and she's also just such a genuinely good-hearted human who's also really great at what she does. This will be a fun conversation. We were chatting, we were friends, so we talked about this stuff outside of business, and we were chatting personally just about some of the changes we've seen in the online space and some of the changes we've seen from different perspectives with content and really what is allowing content to convert. And one of the things we were talking about is how, I don't know, y'all know, we talk so much about consistency in here and the importance of content and creating original content and using that in your marketing, but just how we've seen like a couple of years ago, I've been in the online space. How long have you been in the online space for?
Oh gosh, I mean, years, but in the content space, I mean, 15 almost at this point. So it's from the very early days of content to now, it's been a while.
Like because I've been in the online space probably for 6 years, in business for 5. Yeah. So you've really seen a change. But I feel like when I got started, it was like, I don't know, I always wrote long posts and like vulnerable posts, but I feel like it was all like, you could just like take someone else's quote and repurpose that and like say a couple of lines, like that was a content strategy. Yeah. And I don't know, 15 years ago, I'm sure too, like, no one knew what an email funnel was. So like everything kind of converted in a way where I think that just doesn't fly anymore. Does that feel like you've seen the same transition?
Yes, 100%. I think even the whole content marketing term probably 15 years ago, when I first started doing like communications, writing, journalism, like wasn't even like a full thing yet. I don't think anyone was savvy enough in that way, like that they were building out those funnels, or, Instagram half the time was like a over filtered like photo. I think that was good.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I remember when side tangent, but I remember when Instagram started, because one of my good friends was like all on it. And I was like, what is this thing? Yeah. I was like, I'm like, I don't want to post pictures of my life and now I use it for marketing. So I think we were both having this conversation just to give everyone some context as to why we wanted to hop on live with y'all. Aside from sharing awesome tips, we've just seen so much of a transition, and we've seen this transition from, especially if you're following certain people and like hearing certain things where it's like one thing used to work and things have just changed. And I think when COVID hit, like one of the blessings in the online space is it just started booming, but with it booming is it just got a lot louder. And so I think we as business owners, as marketers, we have to be so much more conscious about the content of our content and what we're putting in there. And what Jess and I were talking about kind of behind the scenes is I think we're going to talk about 2 core strategies, 2 core principles that you all know, but it's so easy to lose sight of them. And we're not always taking these foundational principles and putting them into the content of our content. So that's what we're going to dive into today. And if you have, I'm just checking here to see. Yes. Okay. Just make sure we're like actually still connected. If you have questions while we're chatting for either one of us, feel free. Hey, Courtney says, great topic. Hi, ladies. Nice to have you here. If y'all have questions, feel free to drop them while we're talking, and I will make sure we're kind of piggybacking back and forth. And the same on the replay, tag either one of us if you have questions. But one thing we were chatting about, and I want to hear from Jess, is just like we also have two different perspectives. So we're both business owners, obviously creating our own content, but I'm coaching clients on content and you're coaching writers on how to write content for other businesses. So I thought it would just be fun to hear these two like foundational principles, but through different lenses to see the overlap, but also to get maybe some different insights. So Jess, do you want to, because I want to make sure like we're hearing some things from you here. Do you want to share just a little bit like the first principle? Because I think was something you had a great insight around what that is, and we can kind of just dive into that one first.
Yeah, absolutely. And like Kim mentioned, I think these are things that, you may have heard of, but like because there's so much noise these days and there's so many new shiny ways to do things, it's like coming back to these core things is what so many people are overlooking or what it's easy to get distracted from, but they're really what are like the steadfast tools that make a big difference. So I think one of them is getting really, really clear on who you're talking to. Because there is that tendency, I think, especially like as business owners, where you want to be able to like convert everyone and talk to everyone and have everyone be your client. But what happens is you're really not talking to like anyone at that point. It's like almost like if you're walking down the street and this, bar is like, hey, every kind of music's playing, everyone come on in. And you're like, what am I getting out of that? Versus if it's like, it's 90s night, like it's Backstreet Boys or whatever, or something, right? You're like, that's a specific audience. And you're going to either be not their demographic or specifically their demographic, but then they're going to be able to give such a better experience to you because you're getting exactly what you're expecting. And I think the same is true for our businesses, where if you can really, really get clear on who you're talking to, that's kind of your first step for even knowing like what to write, what are their challenges, what are their dreams, and you can just, what are their demographics? You can go so specific in crafting this type of content that really connects because it's speaking to exactly like who your audience is.
One of the things, you'll have to tell me, because I think we have a different way probably in which we're seeing this with like how we're supporting clients. But as you're talking, because I think for everyone hearing this, I think there's almost a way to like hear this and like want to internally eye roll, like, okay, ideal client. Like, I know I need to know who I'm talking to. Okay, Cameron, Jess, like, yeah.
Got it.
And then yet I'm editing clients' content all the time. And I know how easy it is to know who your ideal client is, but to miss putting this into content. Like, I think seeing like, you can know some of these things, but then it's different. Like, there's a whole different thing with like knowing some of this information and then knowing how to infuse it into your content, infuse it into your marketing, actually speak to this person. And one of the things I heard you saying, Jess, that I think is just so important, you were speaking to those specifics. And I think that is content gold. And I think that's the difference. I mean, this group, I love this group. I love you all so much. And if we go into the group and you look at the feed, 5 people could be talking to the same person. Mm-hmm. And it's like how they're talking to that person and some of those specifics, like that's really the difference maker that makes you stop the scroll or not. Does that feel true? Because I think that's like some of what, like when you're talking about like the 90s music or like some of those things, like that's not just like who you're talking to, but those are like beautiful specifics that just like draw someone in.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. It's the specifics that make the difference and really make even content come to life. So one of the things that, you can do with that is like, even just taking super detailed notes if you have discovery calls. And like, I mean, I used to break them up and be like, okay, what are the, where are they at? Like, and then what's the dream? And I'd break it up like on a page because it just started to give you these really amazing pictures of like, understanding your client and where they're coming from and what they want and what they haven't found yet and how you can help them in that way. And so that can be one way too, where it's like just using those conversations you have with people or looking at what people are asking you the most. And those can all give you such color into like, what can you put in your content that's so specific to like what they're struggling with. Even in terms of like objections, like if you're writing towards things that people may not be sure about if they're buying, right? Or they may be like, need a little bit more confidence or need a little bit more understanding. It's like, those specifics are what are really going to help people understand why they can trust you and why you're the person to help them. And so all of those things, I think, make a big difference from it just sounding like it could work for everyone else, but maybe not for them, to being like, oh, wow, they get me. And that's exactly who I want to be the person to help me.
I'm going to reflect back a couple things you said, because I think it's just helpful for everyone to understand. Because I keep thinking like, I'm like latching onto like the content of your content, like how we put this into the content, because we were talking about specifics, and then you brought up two really great things here. So when we know who you're speaking to, and like, I know everyone here, you know, your ideal client, like I know you get what that means. But what you said so brilliantly is then thinking about two things you said, like specifically, what is the challenge? Like, what's their problem? And I say that because this is something I have to remember, y'all. I like literally do the same thing. I have like running notes of like things that come up on client calls. Like that's where so much of my content comes from. And I have to remember to circle back to what are those challenge points, because we were talking about this before when we were just catching up, like the longer you're in business, like for all of you scaling, this applies to you too. I almost think the longer you are in business, the further you are away from those specifics and those challenges and problem points. And the easier it is to lose sight of who we're speaking to and where they're at in their head and what those challenges are and what we're selling, and to almost make content that's like for us or for our peers and not for our who's. And so I think what you're saying there, it's like getting specific who you're speaking to in terms of what you were saying, like their dreams or challenges. And then the other piece you said, which I think is just a helpful reminder, is also what are some of their objections, and specifically why I think that's so brilliant, because I know we hear about that, right? Speak to the objections in content. But I think in this context, I think we have to remember sometimes with content, we're still selling and we're still marketing. And so when we're like wanting to write a beautiful piece of content, sometimes we forget that and we forget to include those really core pieces. So I think those are two just like golden nuggets. And I want to pull up a question for you. Marie says play live. Okay, Courtney says question for Jessica. And then if you had a thought on that, but she says, as a former journalist, any tips on writing for social media? It's been a stretch for me to go from AP style to this more fluid stream of consciousness writing online. And then I have a question for you as well.
Okay. Oh, such
a good question.
I think I got it. I got it. And I mean, that was a big challenge for me too, because I was trained as a journalism, major. So I get the kind of challenge of being like, okay, I can write AP style, I can write like inverted pyramid, all that stuff. And then you go over to social media where it's so different. So, I mean, everyone may have different advice on this, but I think for me, like what's helpful is almost sometimes even writing a little bit unfiltered at first, where it's such a different form of writing that I think sometimes in journalism, there's almost a security in like the framework. So even if you can just give yourself the chance to play it first and to just write out like as if you're talking to a friend, your funniest, like wittiest, most warm friend who's not going to judge you for any of the stuff you're saying, sometimes then your most natural, just personal voice can come out. And kind of give yourself, sometimes I'll do that even when I'm batching my social media, where I'll write out, a bunch of things. And then I can go back in with that editor lens later, or I can really make sure that I'm achieving the point or adding in the CTA or all like the finer details. But I think that can kind of help get you out of your head of like, here's a blank piece of Google Doc. What am I supposed to do with this? And just get something on the page. And then we all know it's much easier to go in and edit and kind of filter things down. I think the other thing too is just, it's almost just remembering like you're speaking to a person as well, right? Like you're not as much writing about a specific story or an event or an educational thing, but just you're talking to a person. And so really thinking with these specifics, like, what are they thinking about right now? What's something that they're wondering about? Like, what's something that they haven't quite figured out yet? What do they want help with? And trying to just break it down to those little nuggets. I think to the specific point, like that Kim was mentioning too, it doesn't even have to be just the business side, right? Like, so maybe any challenge in someone's life impacts not only just maybe the career, like business, why they're hiring you side, but it could be just their like sleep. Like, are they exhausted because they're thinking about this? It's their relationship, it's their finances, it's like their confidence, how they go through the day. So really just having that human lens of like, sure, this is on paper impacting them in one way, but what's another way that I can speak to just being a human? And let me break off one of those things. You don't have to include everything like you would in a journalistic article. You can just narrow in on one little granular thing and make that your focus for each social media post too. So there's kind of a lot in there, and maybe Kim can call out like a few, but that's kind of where my brain goes, of just making it feel like a little bit more digestible versus this mega thing that you might write in a journalism type of article.
I think that's so helpful. I think it actually ties kind of perfectly into the first core like strategy there of the who, because I think so much of what you're saying is like, who am I talking to?
Yeah.
And like, I mean, I'm not a journalist, but when I was in undergrad, we had to write papers like that. And I think you're just speaking to a different who whenever you're writing something more formal, as opposed to on social media. I think what I'm hearing you say, it's like, it's kind of like, think of who you're talking to and almost like, where are they in their head when they're consuming the content? And so I love what you were saying, like even just like some of those other nuances, it might not even be exactly related to your business, but that's probably where they're at in their mind when they're consuming your content. And I think it's also like, I don't know, I mean, obviously I don't have a journalist background, but I think there's something to, I'm just saying that like how I would chat with clients, and you can tell me if this feels true for you. And I don't want to forget my question I have for you.
Okay.
But I think there's something too, where it's almost like what you were saying, like it's having more of a conversation with a friend. And I think there's something too, where it's like, if you're having a conversation with a friend, you know how you like, we don't like, we start conversations in the middle of a conversation. Like we had it before, and I like kind of just jumped into something we've been talking about before. We didn't like have a formal introduction to our conversation where it's like, and now I'm going to talk to you about our word of the year. We were talking about word of the year. Like we just kind of dove into it. And so I think there's something to that with content, where if we like know who we're speaking to, it's a lot easier to just kind of like, you're just like jumping in, like you like talked to them last week, that I think can make it more conversational. So
I love
just
that.
to pick up on what you were saying, that's what came up for me.
Yeah, I love that. And what you said is so true and like important to point out, that you, as a journalist, like you are in the back of your head thinking about like, who am I writing this for? What level of understanding they already have about this topic, because that's going to like change what you say or how much background you give. So almost just changing your who to be like this kind of person or whatever. And then you're just, what would they like to read? What are they kind of looking, what voice are they looking for? What do they resonate with? So you're right. It's kind of the same thing. It's just applying a different who to it. And that who is a lot less formal, maybe.
Sarah says, "Ooh, such great advice." And then Courtney says, "Yes, so true. There's a security and journalistic writing. And then there's online biz world, which is the Wild West." Thank you. It is the Wild West. For those of you who don't like rules, it's really beneficial in that way. But I totally hear what you're saying, Courtney. I think it's so true. This is actually totally funny and a little bit of a side tangent. And I'm so curious if you have this experience as well, Jess. But when I first started writing content, I started with a blog. And I remember how, like, I mean, I come from like an academic like world, like that's where I learned to write, like straight A student, like writing academic papers. So I remember my first couple of blog posts, like almost like having this push pull of like, and I also studied creative writing, of like wanting to write creative writing in a really formal way, and then needing to spend a whole day editing one blog post, and like having my mom and my now husband, both and boyfriend, like edit everything. And it was very like structured, and how far it's gone from then. So anyway, just to say to what you're Courtney saying, like I totally feel you in that.
It changes so much.
And I don't know if you ever had that.
Oh yeah. And sometimes that reminds me too, like you can even take those longer pieces. Like if you're someone who takes a lot of, enjoys writing the blog post or whatever your most natural style is, you can always start with something like that. And then it's almost like social media are the little nuggets you pull out of it and break up into 5 different, posts too. So you can kind of find comfort in the fact if you really like those articles or blog posts or longer form, you've done the hard work. So now just repurpose it into smaller ways. But it's like, it can be editing for days, like your precious, like first things, especially the first time you do anything takes so much longer. Then you find your flow and your rhythm. And the same is true in many ways for social media or any kind of content writing too.
I so appreciate you sharing that as well. And I don't want to take us too off tangent, but I think it's just so nice for everyone to hear, because I think there's a way in which I know, because I hear this from clients, where when you're starting this process, and I think there's, even if you're a writer, or you're a creative writer, or you're a journalist, right? Like, you know how to write. Writing content for marketing, for business it's a different skill set.
Yeah.
And we are learning something new. And anything, like my first live stream, like anything new you're doing, like it just is more like muscle memory that you're like building up. And so it tends to take longer, and it tends to make your muscles sore in a way that when you're doing it longer. And I say that because I think so often it's so easy to see, like, I don't know, I have a ton of content out there, and like to like compare yourself to someone where it's like, well, that seems so easy, or hear me say like, it's so easy, and forget that like we all had to muscle through it at the start. So like just really appreciate you saying that, because I think everyone hearing that, like, no, if it feels like work, like that's normal, especially if you're starting. And I know for me, sometimes it still feels like I'm muscling through it, and then sometimes it feels like it's flowing like magic.
Right. Yeah, kind of giving yourself that permission, even just mentally, that like this is a little bit harder, and knowing that it does take less and less, not only of like the brain power to write, but just the brain power to like get into your rhythm, to know what you want to say, like to be less freaked out by it or intimidated too.
Totally. To know who you're talking to and to have those conversations.
Yeah.
So I'm going to bring us back on topic. I had a question for you, because I think this might be helpful for everyone, because they get to hear my lens all the time, and I want to hear your lens a little bit. I think what's interesting about the work you're doing is so much of what you're doing is creating content or supporting people in your agency to create content for other business owners. Whereas we're always like, as business owners, if we're creating our own content, through the lens of I'm creating content myself. And so I'm wondering, when you're like supporting the like writers at your agency, or like if you were to create content for someone else, and we're thinking about the who, like what are some of the questions maybe they're asking, or just like some of the things they're looking for? Because I think it's just such a different skill set to like have to write content for someone else. And I just wonder if you have any insights there that might be helpful for someone who's writing their own content, that they can kind of steal from the writers. Does that make sense as a question?
It does. I think so. And tell me if I go off track and stuff, but yeah, I think some of the, we'll wind back. So I think some of the things that I will look for, and this even goes for if I'm first talking with a client who's a brand, right? And they're saying, we want 8 articles on this. I'm even getting clear and relaying a lot of this to my writers and trying to think about, okay, so, what is the audience, right? But to me, that means like, what is their day-to-day like? So if they are a marketer, they're going to be versed in different things. They're going to be thinking about different things. I'm going to think about like, what are they responsible for? Like what results, or what are they worried about achieving, kind of thing. I'm going to be thinking about, what's their familiarity or background on this topic? Because I'm not going to need to give a ton of background about what certain acronyms are or things like that if someone knows the ins and outs of an industry, right? I might think about what other approaches are they considering. So that can be important, whether you're a brand or whether you are, a business owner. You want to know, what else are people thinking about? If you're a health coach, are they thinking about trying keto in addition to like South Beach or whatever, or are they looking for something else? That can be really helpful for you in terms of content pieces and even tackling why you're different and what you offer. I would also be thinking about maybe even just like, what would be the dream for them? I know we touched on that a little bit, but if it's like, maybe a better thing is, what is like the outcome that this person is looking for from reading this piece? I think that's a big one, because it can be so different if they're looking for, this kind of goes into buyer's journey, but it's like, are they looking for just educational? They're just early into their journey when they're kind of like hadn't read much about it before, versus they're looking for information that is going to confirm whether or not they buy with this specific brand or client. Like, because then they might need more of the testimonials or case studies or things that verify that this is the right decision for them, but they're not going to need that really high level stuff because they've already done that research. So that would be another one, just where are they at in that journey?
Everyone watching later on, go back, because you can't like rewind when we're on here, but on the replay, because I think you just said like there's just so many great prompts there. And I think just even if anyone was stuck on content, but I think so much here, I think what's helpful here is, again, I think most people like have an idea of their ideal client, but then it's figuring out like, how do you take your ideal client and then speak to them in content? Like, turn that into content marketing. So I think some of what you're saying, you think through here that you're going to relay to your writers, it's so helpful because this is exactly like the juicy stuff that then we can create content around. And you said a lot of good stuff, but 3 things that jumped out to me. And let's see if I can read my own notes here. Like my handwriting, I look like I'm a doctor, y'all. I think one of the first things you said that really jumped out to me is just really understanding, like, yes, they're day to day, but also like where their knowledge base is and what their language is. And I think that's something, like, I think about that with content. This is one of those things I think sometimes we think, like, as we're scaling and as we like, it's like almost like expert syndrome. Like, I actually think when we're starting off in business, in many ways, it's sometimes easier to create content that connects to your who more. And it's so easy to almost like get super smart in content and like use all these smart big words and use all these like industry lingo words that people, like, we don't know if they know or not, or if they're speaking that. So I think that was just really, really smart, and something I'm always looking for editing clients' work or my own. Just like, are we using the language that these people actually understand? Like, that everyone, like, if we were just like having a conversation day to day, this is like how people speak. It's not about dumbing it down. It's just about speaking the same language. Really the other thing you said is, and I kind of want to circle back to this a little bit, but what other approaches are people thinking about? And I think that's just, again, like, I think we think ideal client, we almost like stay on the surface level. And this is like when you really dive into the psychographics and like think about like, and this is not like, this is just being a smart business owner, y'all. Like, this isn't to be negative, but we are in a saturated business market. Honestly, ideally, you are in a market space that's saturated because that means there's people who want what you have to buy. But that means people who are looking at you probably are considering 1 or 2 other options. Like, that's normal. It's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean you're not great at your work. But if you can be smart about that and think about what other options are they considering, I think what you're saying, like, that's such a great way to get into the who, and then to know to create content around that. And then the last thing you spoke to, which I think might piggyback into our second strategy a bit, but really that outcome. And I think this is we talk a lot about speaking to results in content in this group, but I think there's what the nuance you brought in is what's the actual outcome someone wants to get from that piece of content. And I think that's smart and something it's so easy to forget about. So I don't know, I'm basically regurgitating what you said, but I wanted to just put a couple those on those. I don't know if anything else comes up for you around either of those. I think everyone listening, like, take some notes from what Jess said. Like, I think it's just really smart in terms of what goes into content and what's going to help you stand out to convert.
Yeah. And even with the approaches, something that stood out to me when you were kind of like sharing that is even just what else have they tried before that now they might be thinking of you? Because I know even with business, like, you know, for me, I took so many different like group programs at the start of my career. And so by the time I was ready for more business coaching, to me, it was really appealing to have someone do the one-on-one and not have like one way of doing it. So even like with Kim, it's amazing because not everyone, sometimes there is a 5-step strategy and that's all people, you know, offer, which can be so valuable for a certain season. But for me, because I had tried these other things, other approaches really stood out. So you can kind of think through that too. It's like, what else are they looking at? And also, what have they already tried that they've now somehow stumbled into you? And how can you really use that to further educate them and share why you're different and why you're different on purpose too, like why that's valuable for them at the stage they're at now.
And it kind of goes back to the specifics we were talking about at the beginning, but then specifics, not just for the sake of like, I think sometimes we hear specifics and it's almost like, I don't know, need to just talk about the shape of the light bulb, like become like, you know, we get like writery, flowery instead of like the specifics that are actually going to connect with our who, but we're talking about like, that's really going to like meet them in the conversation they're having in their own mind. And I think to what you're saying, like where they're at in the customer journey. And I think what's beautiful about this is then when you can bring those specifics into your content, that is how you stand out. That is how you can then speak to what are the things your specific who needs to hear to understand why you're the specific option that's going to be the best investment for them, or the best, if it's a product or service, the best product or service for them.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to use their language too. You all have our own voices and you don't want to morph so much that you do sound like someone else. But if you constantly hear people saying a certain phrase on discovery calls, or you always get the same question, or maybe you would say things differently because you're the expert and you have the training and know what it's officially called, what are they actually saying and describing it as? That's so important for making sure you're really connecting with that who, versus kind of just maybe going over their head in a way they still aren't like landing with, or would never, because they're not the expert.
I used to, I still use it. I just think at this point it's like so ingrained in me. I used to have a document where I would just write down phrases that people would say. And part of it is because I'm a geek and I just love to geek out in the brain and all of those things. And so like, if you read some of my old, like, you guys do yourself a favor and go find my like oldest blog post, right? And like, in this study by so-and-so, this is what happens in the brain. And it's like,
Right.
I mean, I'd like to think everyone's as interested in that as me, but it was just to what you're saying, like not the phrases people use. And so I made myself a cheat sheet where I would just like actually write down like how people, like real people who aren't being super nerds are talking about this. So I get included in my content. And this is almost a whole nother live stream conversation for you and I to have at some point. I think a lot of the work then sometimes for us as content creators, and I wonder if this feels different if you're creating content for someone else because you're removed. But I think sometimes our work is to get out of our own way in terms of ego, where it's like, it's like, I think sometimes such a want to like prove we know the big word, where like,
right,
you just don't need to use that big word or like prove like these things where it's like, that actually doesn't serve the content. And do you find, because you have that like almost like that step back when you're in the agency versus creating your own content, that there's a difference there with that ego piece? I know this is totally off topic, but I think it's interesting.
I do think it helps in that sense, but I do notice with my writers, especially if they are newer to a client or a topic, there is that tendency because they're trying to show that they're really educated on it. So there is that nuance of like breaking it down so it's, just as someone would say it if they're talking, or the way they're talking about it with their colleagues or things like that, versus proving that what the lingo is and stuff. So I definitely think that there's that tendency no matter what. And something that's interesting on the agency side too is I've had clients who will even put our writing through like a measure online that says, is this, even sixth grade or less, like reading level. They don't want the fanciness. And actually there's this app, Hemingway, that's like a plugin, or it's helpful. You can put your writing into it if you're looking for just a way to start practicing this yourself, but it'll break up the big sentences. It'll choose words that are not the long 15 syllable like words, but just say it plainly, and it's almost harder in a way, but it's such a practice of just, can the mind even carry this sentence that has so many pieces to it? Or can we say this simpler? Can we say it in fewer words? Can we say it more directly? So that's something I'm continually working on. I mean, I like to talk. And so
it's such a challenge. It's, I know we're taking this a little off topic, but I think it's actually like really valuable for everyone to hear. And this is something, I mean, y'all, I am long-winded. We do long live streams on here. My posts like need to go into the comments all the time because they're too long. They might as well be blog posts. So this is something I'm constantly working on. And the Hemingway app is, we don't use it, but it's a great one. And they've done, look at me wanting to prove like that I know, like talking about what we're talking about, it's so meta. They've done studies, y'all, that people connect more. It is the sixth grade or fifth grade, like that level or less for content and copy. And so when we edit, we do a brief edit, but I'm always looking for like where, basically my question is like, where am I trying to prove I'm smart? Or like, and how, like, you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of the question mark. Like, where am I basically trying to prove? Because that's not serving the content. And that's not really speaking to the who, kind of bringing it back full circle. That's really for my own ego and trying to go back and like delete those sentences or delete those words. It is probably Hemingway who talked. No, it's Stephen King. We can like geek out on writers who talks about killing your darlings. It's being willing to kill your darlings for the sake of your work. And y'all, it's hard. Like I edit, like we delete a lot and it's still that long. So you can only imagine what they are. But I think it's one of the most valuable things you can do for content. And I think it's just helpful to hear that from your frame as well.
Yeah. It's so true. I actually even heard Gabby Bernstein, who's an author and in this space and stuff, to say that once, that exact phrase. I was thinking of when you said it, because she was with her, editor, and they were saying that's something even we have to do, being in this industry for years and years, being very successful. You have to really peel back like what you think is the finest sentence and just use that gauge of like, what does my audience get it? Will my audience get this? Or is this just for me because I like the way it sounds, It's hard though. It's really hard.
It's so hard. Acting, that's what they do with editing, right? And like, it's hard too when you like pour money and all of these resources into whether it's a film or piece of content, and like things end up on the chopping floor. But that's also, anyone who's seen a movie that's been poorly edited, you lose yourself. You can't watch the story anymore. And it's the same with our content. So I think everyone doesn't need to be a brilliant writer to have content that converts. But I think this is a way to be like, you can like skyrocket your writing abilities if you think about, who are you speaking to? Mm-hmm. Are you writing to your who, or are you writing for yourself? And not even from the place if it's not about you, but just like what we're talking about here. And then can you just delete some of those fancy smart words where you're trying to prove something? Like, that'll elevate your content if you do nothing else. I think. Okay, this brings us to, because we had another, and I want to make sure, otherwise we'll just talk about this forever. So we had another core principle, and I think this actually is like, just ties in perfectly, which I'll just introduce and we can just kind of dive into it a little bit. But I think it ties in perfectly because here we're talking about who are you talking to and kind of like speaking their language. And I think the other question you can ask yourself is, if someone reads a piece of content, what are you hoping they're going to take away from it? Really, what is the purpose of a piece of content? And I think that is one of the other elements. And I think you have some really just insightful ways to think about that in terms of looking at a piece of content and really getting clear on the purpose and the function for each piece, and how to use that to gauge the content of your content. I don't know if you want to dive in, if you had some initial thoughts, and we can kind of just play around with this one a little bit.
Yeah, I see this one a lot, and it's one I work with clients with a lot too. Like even recently, a week or two ago, all the Q1 plans are kind of coming in. This is what we'll write about, and this will be the blog for this week and the next week. And I had to kind of check with a client because they have all these ideas, but it's a very different way to write if you're writing for even like, is this an SEO thing, for example? Like, are we trying to make this something that ranks in Google and drives traffic? Or is this going to be something that may not bring anyone in on Google because it's not something people would be searching for, but it's still a helpful thing to have because there's parts of our audience that are searching for this information, and it's going to be a piece we can reference, and send them back to. So that's like one piece. I mean, that changes so much about the structure of how I'm writing it, of the title, of just knowing kind of why people are coming to it. On one, maybe they're a new customer who's never found this client before. On the other, maybe they are already been, thinking about this client 5 ways, and now they just need that last piece that really like helps convert them and gives them that trust. So that's like one way. And then I think other ways I see it a lot is like, even like web copy, where I think there's that tendency to want to make a web page do everything and to be so excited about like, okay, on my homepage, I'm going to tell them about me. I'm going to tell them my services. And you can certainly share a little bit of that, but I think you want to know, if I have this one page, what is the purpose of this one page? Is it to capture their email so that I can nurture them in my funnel? Is it to, if it's an about page, tell them about you and your story and build that trust and connection? If it's a landing page or a sales page, you don't necessarily want to be taking people off to show them your social media links. You want to have them buy at the end. And so that changes how you structure things, where you place things, how direct you are, what your words are, how action oriented you can be, with buy now, sign up, all those things. So I think the purpose of the content is so critical. Not only who are you writing for, but what do you want them to get from this, or what action do you want them to take after reading this piece of content?
I think what you're saying and what I'm hearing is like, there's almost like 2 pieces to the purpose. I think there's like macro, like what is the goal of this piece of content. I
Yeah.
talk with clients about this a lot when we're looking at strategy and really picking one clear goal. Just like we want to have one call to action. We want to have one goal. I think about this with my podcast. Like that was something I had to get clear on. What's my one goal of my podcast? It doesn't mean it won't also meet other goals,
True.
but I have to know, like, am I trying to have this be growth? Is this for conversions? Like, what is that goal? Because that's going to change so much of the content that we're putting inside, just like how we're speaking to things, like you said, titles, all of these different like little choices you're going to make. And so I think that's like one big piece you're saying. And then I think like on a more micro level, what you're saying is like each piece of content, and also what is the purpose? Like, what is the goal? What's the outcome? What are you hoping someone takes away from the content? And what are you hoping someone takes as the next step? And just be clear on those. And I think it's so helpful. Like, I think, again, hearing this is probably one of those things where it's like, well, duh, like, of course, like I need to know like the purpose and the outcome, but it's so easy. We all do this. I think there's almost like a scarcity mindset sometimes when whether it's writing a sales page or a promo post or piece of content, where we think this is my only chance to connect with someone. So I need to put everything in here. And I think what you're really saying, and what's so important, or what we're really saying here, is we really have to take this, it's more like an abundant mindset, right? Where it's like, this is one conversation with your who that you're having. And we want to keep one goal, one focus, one point. If we try to cram, like if I called you up for 1 5-minute call and I tried to cram everything from our friendship into that call, like it would be really fucking overwhelming. And it's the same if we're thinking about creating content for our audience. It gets really overwhelming, and overwhelmed, confused people, not only do they not buy, they don't click through, they don't sign up for whatever your goal is. Does that feel like I'm kind of like, or like speaking in a way that makes sense?
Yeah, it's almost like if you see a, Instagram post that has 5 different call to actions of, like this or leave a comment or say that, you're kind of like, well, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know if I'm going to do any of those. Whereas if they're very clear, they're like, comment below what, and then they give you a prompt, you're like, oh, okay, I know exactly what to do. Or save this post so that you can reference it for, whatever. It just makes it that much clearer. So it makes it more likely you're going to get that outcome. And also it's just way easier as a reader. You're like, the burden is much less. You can participate then.
Yeah. And I think that's just like, I love what you just said there, because I think that's helpful. I'm always saying, like, how can we make it easy on our audience to get to know us, to build a relationship, to buy from us? And I think what you're saying there is it's literally easier for someone to consume when we're making it easy for them to consume. We're not giving them a million things to do. Everyone's busy. Like, they're getting enough stuff in their face. So I think that's just such a helpful like frame as well, where it's like, would you be overwhelmed if you read this post, or if you had to make a decision among these things? I can't help but geek out on brain stuff. They have done studies, y'all. When you give people multiple options for things to do, I think our brain thinks like, well, then people will at least choose one of those things. But once you give people more than 2 or 3 options, it's not that people choose like less things. They just stop choosing and making a decision at all. And so it's the same thing with our calls to actions. If you're giving people multiple options, I think our brain thinks like, well, maybe this one option won't get as much, but like, I'm just covering my bases. But what happens is people get overwhelmed. Decision fatigue is real, and they do nothing. So I think it's just a helpful thing for the literal conversion of a piece of content as well.
Yeah. And I think that you can help yourself too by getting really clear on your goals, like what you're trying to do, whether it's for the piece of content, whether it's for the quarter, like you mentioned, even with your podcast, where if it's an engagement thing, you might be writing differently. You might be saying things like comment below, like share this post, like, or things like that are going to build your engagement. And maybe that's your metric that you're really focusing on that quarter, that you want to increase engagement by whatever. If you're trying to increase like sales specifically, you might have to write more sales pieces. You might have to be more direct in your content with selling. It almost is like, what is your main business goal? And you can have all of them and they all have a time and place, but almost if you're kind of like, well, I don't know what I want the purpose to be, maybe start there and be like, well, what is the direction of my business this season? And how can my content not just be content I have to do to put out more stuff and have more on my plate, but how can it support me in a really concrete way in reaching those goals that are going to grow my business?
I think what's so helpful too, that's kind of like, what's the macro goal you're focused on? And then again, like micro, like you can zoom into like, then what are you going to put into your content about that? But I think just for everyone listening, I think why that's so helpful, and I so appreciate you sharing that, is it's so easy, if you're not clear on that, to see someone else's content and to love it, and someone else who has a very different current goal in business, and then think that's the right way to write content, or that's the way you should create your content. And it's not that that is wrong or that that isn't brilliant content, but to realize they might have a very, very different business goal than you currently, and they might be measuring a very different metric. And again, it's not that one goal can't end up serving multiple purposes, but I think that's just one of those places where getting your eyes on your own paper and getting clear on that purpose is, again, it's such a foundational thing, but it's so easy to lose sight of, especially I think when it comes to content. Because I think one of the biggest things, and you tell me, this is actually interesting, because I wonder if this happens for your writers. I find for clients, when they're stuck on content, one of the easiest things to do is to get into comparisonitis and almost to like look to other people for inspiration, where it's like almost like the one place we don't want to go for inspiration is there. Like we kind of want to get our eyes on our own paper and the goal. But I wonder when you see with your writers, because they are like, there is that, they want to please like clients, but like there is that step removed. Do you think it's easier for them, because you probably have to get clear on that goal, for them to stay like focus in that way? Or do you think that there's still like almost that like, I feel like I have to do it a certain way mentality?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's human nature, that it's almost there if you're not feeling fully secure to be like, where can I bolster that security and maybe find it in other places? I think that one place I'll see it used for good is almost like the research, right? Where if they're researching something, I think it's okay to kind of go and see what else is out there, what have other people said. But then the part that is critical for them, and is I think critical for business owners that they never miss, is, well, how do we make this different and more unique to us, or better? You can maybe use that in some business circles, right? Versus like, you don't want to always be better than, like, in a friendly way, your competition.
Yeah.
But I think that's an interesting thing, is like, it's never like, go read what everyone else has done and do the same thing. It's like, what could your spin be that then makes that post better than anything else, or offer something different? So that's where you can maybe use it as like a force for good. But yeah, I think getting clear on that goal, it informs like what you're going to really want out of a piece. And even like on the agency side, a client too, like, it can be as granular as, some of their KPIs were things like, okay, they want to grow their blog. Like that's the overarching goal. One of their KPIs is like, well, let's make sure people are spending more time on it. And so then that really informs, okay, well, are we doing videos now? Are we adding in a video? Because that'll bump up the time that they spend. Are we doing long form versus short form? Because that's going to take more time to read. So you can really take it kind of both ways of just like, what's that big thing? And then how can that inform how you do things differently and in a way that's really true for you and your goals and your voice and your audience too, your who. Does that make sense? It's kind of a wind about.
No, that makes complete sense. And I think what's so helpful there is just even hear like how different those like goals can be. And KPI, just for everyone, like we're just talking about like the metrics and like what people are looking at, because everyone's on the same page. But I think just seeing like, and I think why that's so helpful is seeing like how that informs then literally how you're going to structure content and when you're going to put in, and not just what you're talking about, but like how you're going to strategically structure that. And I think why that's helpful for everyone in here, kind of with that comparisonitis piece, is it would be so easy to land, like, let's say the goal was to get more people staying on the page is the goal, and to see the more videos, or to see some of those things that are strategically put in place to keep like the page sticky. And if that's not your goal, like, and then to think like, that's the thing I need to do, when you might have the completely different goal in place. And so I think that's just why it's not like the one thing is better than the other. It's just, I think that's where we can really screw ourselves with like, from coming from a really great intended place when we're doing, I mean, I know what you're saying with the research, like to pull something different, but I think we have to just be so mindful to get back to, which is why I love this foundational piece. What is that goal, overarching goal in business? And then what's the goal of each piece?
Yeah.
I wonder if I want to go down this rabbit hole. I was going to ask you if you had any, just because I think some of these strategies are just like, it's just nice for people to hear, like, but I think that could almost take us down a rabbit hole. But I wonder maybe this will be more useful for people, so I don't take us down a massive rabbit hole. I wonder for like when you're working on the agency side, when you're looking at like macro like goal, and then also for each piece, are there certain questions you're like asking clients, or that you're having your writers like make sure like things to include to make sure you're like really nailing the purpose of the brief or like what someone's looking for?
Yeah, I'm definitely having a conversation around business goals. That's important because that will change whether or not we really like feature an opt-in or freebie type of thing. If that's like the main goal, then I'm thinking about, well, can we put it, before, above the fold, which is that front part of the computer screen before people scroll. Maybe it's the last thing people read in the post. Maybe we're even creating some kind of graphic for it so it stands out more. So I'm definitely asking those kinds of questions, and then that informs kind of like what we're featuring and how intense we go on things. And that will also be, it can be even as subtle as, I have a client where sometimes for the longest time, they were pointing to their sales page at the end of every blog post and saying, if you're interested, book a call with us and our sales team will guide you, or something like that. And what we really found from talking with them further and saying, well, where are you? What stage are your readers at? Have they found your blog before? Is this their first time visiting? We really decided that an opt-in was probably more appropriate to feature there, because if someone's just reading your blog for the first time, they might not be warmed up enough yet to go book a call and spend an hour of their day with a salesperson. And so then that really just changed, where let's get them into an opt-in or a freebie, and then we can nurture them in an email sequence when they will be ready and they will have that confidence and connection built up and want a call. So those kinds of questions of like, what is your business goal? How comfortable is your audience like with you at this point? What stage of the, buyer's journey are they at? What are they looking to get out of these? Those are all those purpose questions that really do inform what you're promoting, where it's at in your content, how often you're mentioning it, and what types of things you are offering of value to your audience, because they're going to be, even if they're all great to you, they're going to be different to your audience and valuable at different stages of their journey as well.
I think that's so helpful, because I think it can be confusing sometimes, where it's like you get the idea of like, know the purpose or know your goal, and then even like know the purpose of it. It's like, yes, that makes sense. But I love those specifics, because I think it also ties in really beautifully with why knowing your who is so important.
Yeah.
And I think some of those pieces there, where it's like some of the things we're talking about here aren't even about like literally what you're writing, but it's about understanding, like you said, like, where is someone at in their customer journey? Where are they at in relationship to you and your work, your offer? Like how much they know about, even like what is their problem awareness that they have with like what it is you help them with, so that you're really clear. And then you can marry that with your goal to know like, what is that next step, that CTA that makes sense. And I think that's just so helpful. It's something I'm always chatting with clients about too, because it's just so easy to like pour your heart and soul. And like we do pour a lot into content, and then to think there's something wrong with your content and that's why it's not converting, when really, if we zoom back, your content's great. It's just that we're not matching the goal of your content to like where your people are at in that next step. And so things like you're saying, where it's like then thinking about like, maybe we don't want to take them right to a sales page. Maybe we do want to take them to an opt-in or to a free call, or just something that's just like an easier next step in the relationship or next step in the journey.
Yeah, I think that can really help make it feel less overwhelming, right? Because you can hear all these things and be like, well, how do I know if my content's good or not? But it's like, if you can look at it with more of just that scientific lens of like, there's specific things you can do depending on what your goal is. And if you get clear on that, it's much easier to sprinkle in those other things or to tweak something here and there, and to see how many options you can play with. Like, it's not this all or nothing type of thing. There's a lot you can do to move the needle. I think it can kind of give a more hopeful place of like, oh, there's a lot I can play with here. It's not my writing. It's not my story. People, there's so many tactics in there that are subtle and that can make a big improvement. And it's just a matter of like, just testing. It's data, right? It's information, what's working, what's not, and give it long enough to measure one thing. And then before you move on to tweaking something else.
I thank you very much for saying that. Give it long enough as well, right? Like,
but
I really love what you said just about taking like that scientific approach. And I think because that helps us get into a little bit of neutrality. And if we're taking a scientific approach, when we run tests as scientists, we're testing one variable at a time. And I think that's kind of going back to the purpose, where it's like really getting clear in that one call, that like that one goal of your content, that one purpose. So you're really measuring one variable at a time, because otherwise it's really hard to get accurate data and to like be able to measure that. And it can have you think things like, my content sucks, or this isn't working, instead of like, it's just this one variable or this one thing that we're testing. I also thank you for sharing that, because I'm hoping for everyone listening that can also be maybe a little bit more, not for permission giving is the right word, but just a little bit like to give yourself a little bit more grace, because I think the brain's easiest thing to jump to is I suck at writing, or I suck at marketing, or I'm doing this wrong. Instead of sometimes it's simply, no, we just need to change the goal or change the next step, or like change the subject line, change one little thing here. And that's the little bit of the difference maker. And that's where data can be a beautiful, beautiful support.
Yes. Yeah. That permission to just, it can take time, and that is so hard to give it lots of time to kind of see what the variables, what's performing, what's not. But like, just knowing that even if you're new to business, it takes time for people to know you for your one message and for you to nail down your who and speak only to them. So for me, that was a big lesson in my journey too, is just, it's okay that it's going to take a little time, and it might not even be your content. It might just be that people need to hear it over and over again before they really understand who you're speaking to and how you can help them.
Like louder for the people in the back. If I could just like say one thing to everyone, it's that sometimes nothing is wrong at all. This is not to say things have to take a long time or like anything like that. It's just sometimes it takes a second for people to hear things enough time to connect with them, to build that relationship. And there's literally nothing wrong. And we don't give it enough time before we test another variable. And so then we're just always at the beginning of a test, instead of like seeing one test through long enough for people to pick up the message and connect with it. I think that's a perfect place to end on, because otherwise I'm going to literally keep you on here for 14 hours. I'm almost forgetting we're live, and I'm like, I just want to let's just talk about this some more. I know everyone watching, listening, if you have any questions, definitely drop any questions for us before we hop off, and on the replay as well for either one of us. But tell everyone where they can find you. I know you have an awesome gift as well that I think will be really helpful for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. I'll be sure to share that in the comments. But if you do want to find me, follow me, connect with me, I'd love to support you on your journeys. You can do that. My website is hijessicajohnson.com. And that's also my Instagram handle, hijessicajohnson. So those are probably the two best places. From there, you can find, more about my agency, more about my course, podcast, all the things basically. So kind of start there and choose your own adventure.
Perfect. I'll make sure. Well, I'm thinking this is a podcast. We're going to put those in the show notes, but you can just drop those in the link if you want to just see one of the comments for everyone. And then definitely everyone watching on the replay, go check out Jess's work. She's, as you can see, just a wealth of information. She's been in this space, and she knows a thing or a million about content. And I think it's just so helpful to have your lens, because you really do have that beautiful lens of both being the business owner, but also just seeing it through your clients who are writing for other businesses. So I'm so grateful to you for sharing with everyone and just helping us dive into some of these principles from a slightly different perspective. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been awesome.
I'm grateful for you, everyone. I adore you. I love you. I will be back next week. I'm just seeing if we have any questions before we hop off. I don't think so, because we have a little lag, but I think we're all set there. I'll be back next week with another topic. And if any of you all want to connect with me, I'll drop a link for that as well. For anyone who wants support, I would love to connect with you. And I always, Zoom, I'm waving goodbye, but I always have to figure out how to end on the live stream. So bye, y'all.